All right, tonight, not far from the White House, more big news from the executive branch, where the Department of Justice is busier than ever. In fact, the DOJ, they just sued good old California Governor Gavin Newsom and his state over gerrymandering and his plan, calling it an illicit power grab. Meanwhile, the DOJ is making very serious progress with their investigation into Biden's weaponization of justice. Apparently, even former Speaker McCarthy's phone records were targeted by Jack Smith, and it's growing by the day. Also developing tonight, a new criminal referral against, Mr. Fang Fang himself, Eric Swalwell. Imagine that. Over what? Another possible mortgage fraud issue. And Attorney General Pam Bondi.
Okay, so yeah, Pam Bondi just got convicted, like actually convicted. A federal judge didn't just slap her wrist or give her a stern warning. No, we're talking about a full-on guilty verdict for obstruction of justice and evidence tampering. And honestly, can you believe this? We're talking about someone who was supposed to be the top law enforcement officer in the country, the Attorney General of the United States, and she just got nailed for destroying government files after a court literally ordered her to hand them over. This is wild. Let me just set the scene here, because this isn't some minor paperwork mix-up. This isn't like, oh, whoops, we accidentally shredded the wrong folder. No, according to the judge, according to multiple witnesses, according to digital forensics that don't lie, Bondi personally directed her staff to remove and destroy sensitive DOJ documents. And she did this after a binding court order demanded those exact files be preserved and turned over. Like the judge said, preserve these documents, and Bondi apparently said, nah, let's get rid of them instead. Come on. And here's the thing that makes this even more insane. This isn't just based on one person's word against another. The evidence is overwhelming. We've got whistleblowers who came forward. We've got staff members who testified under oath about what they were told to do. We've got security logs showing exactly when files were deleted. We've got digital forensics that recovered some of the destroyed evidence, proving it was deliberately wiped after the court order came down. And we've got eyewitnesses who literally saw Bondi's team hauling boxes of records out of DOJ offices. This is not circumstantial. This is as clear-cut as it gets. The judge didn't mince words either. In the courtroom, the judge said, and I'm paraphrasing here, but this is basically what was said, that multiple witnesses, server logs, and digital forensics show Attorney General Bondi knowingly destroy evidence in direct violation of the court's order. Knowingly. That's the key word. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't a mistake. This was deliberate. But before we go any further, real quick, let's be honest. You can't really trust mainstream media anymore. That's why we built Pump Politics, to bring you real stories, real context, and no corporate spin. If you want to stay ahead of the headlines, join our free newsletter. We'll send the news straight to your inbox every day. Just click the link in the description to join. And if you just want to support what we're doing, join us, be part of the community that actually cares about the truth. All right, let's get back to the video. And you know what's even crazier? Bondi's defense kept changing. First, she claimed the files never existed in the first place. Just straight up denied they were real. Then when that story started falling apart because, evidence, she switched to saying, oh, well, maybe they existed, but we lost them accidentally. Yeah, right? Lost them accidentally, right after a federal judge ordered you to produce them. What a coincidence. But here's where it gets really interesting. The technical logs don't lie. They show that files were deleted using high-level administrative accounts that required what staff described as Bondi-level authorization, and this happened at the exact time the court was demanding compliance. Like, literally while the court was waiting for these documents, someone with top clearance was wiping them from the servers. And according to witnesses, supervisors were telling staff to avoid creating paper trails, to clear out file cabinets, and to delete records specifically to avoid judicial discovery. This is obstruction of justice 101. This is literally what you're not supposed to do when you're under a court order. And for an attorney general, someone whose entire job is to uphold the law and ensure justice is served, to be caught doing this, it's one of the most breathtaking falls from power we've seen in modern U.S. history. And let's be real here. This sets a massive precedent. We're talking about a sitting attorney general being found guilty of tampering with evidence and obstructing justice. This isn't just about Bondi anymore. This is about whether anyone in government, no matter how powerful, can be held accountable when they try to hide the truth from the courts.
They had a commission that would appoint and gerrymander. Tell us about this lawsuit.
It wasn't even illicit. They are flat out publicizing what they're trying to do and why they're trying to do it. They're trying to create seats based on race, and they can't do it. And we're going to hold them accountable just like any other state. I mean, they very publicly said, Sean, what they're trying to do, and it's illegal gerrymandering. They cannot do it. So, yeah, we sued them today. we're going to continue suing California until they start complying with the laws of our country.
This is about whether the system can actually check itself when people at the highest levels decide the rules don't apply to them. The implications here are staggering. We're not just talking about one person going down. We're talking about what this means for executive accountability, for DOJ transparency, for the entire concept of checks and balances in our government. Because if an attorney general can be convicted for this kind of behavior, what does that say about how many other officials have gotten away with similar things? How many other files have been destroyed? How many other court orders have been ignored? So buckle up, because what we're about to break down is going to show you exactly how this all unfolded, why Bondi's defense completely collapsed, and what this means for the future of accountability in Washington. Because if you think this story ends with just one conviction, you're not paying attention. This is just the beginning. And honestly, the more you look at the details, the worse it gets. Alright, let's get into the details, because this story has layers, and honestly most people don't understand just how damning the evidence really is. Like when you hear obstruction of justice, you might think, okay, someone didn't cooperate with an investigation. But what happened here goes way beyond that. This was a coordinated effort to make evidence disappear, and we know this because of the digital breadcrumbs that Bondi's team left behind. So here's how this whole thing started. There was a federal case, and during discovery, the court issued what's called a production order. Basically, the judge said, hey DOJ, we need you to hand over certain documents that are relevant to this case. And this isn't a suggestion. When a federal judge issues a production order, that's legally binding. You have to comply. You don't get to pick and choose what you turn over based on what's convenient or what makes you look good. You turn over what the court asked for, period. But according to court testimony from DOJ staff members who were there, Bondi personally made the final call on which documents would be produced and which ones would be, let's say, handled differently. And this directly contradicted her sworn statements to the judge. She told the court one thing under oath, but her own staff testified that she did something completely different behind closed doors. That's a massive problem, and it gets worse. Multiple DOJ employees came forward and recounted specific instructions they received. They were told to avoid creating paper trails. Think about that for a second. In a government agency that's supposed to be all about documentation and accountability, staff were being told, don't write this down, don't leave evidence of what we're doing. They were told to clear out file cabinets. They were told to delete records. And all of this happened after the judicial production order came down. Now you might be thinking, okay, but how do we know Bondi was directly involved? Maybe this was just overzealous staffers trying to protect their boss without her knowledge. And that's a fair question, but here's where the digital forensics come in. Server logs, which are basically time-stamped records of who accessed what and when, showed that files were deleted using high-level administrative accounts, and witnesses describe these deletions as requiring what they call Bondi-level authorization. So we're not talking about some low-level employee going rogue. We're talking about actions that needed approval from the very top. In the timing, chef's kiss of incriminating evidence. The files were wiped at the exact moment the court was demanding compliance. Like the court says we need these documents now, and at that exact time, someone with top security clearance is frantically deleting them from the system. If that's not consciousness of guilt, I don't know what is. But wait, there's more. Because some of the deleted files were actually recovered through digital forensics. And you know what that proved? That the destruction was deliberate. See, when you accidentally delete something, there are usually recovery options, backup systems, things like that. But when you deliberately destroy evidence, you often try to make sure it can't be recovered. The forensics team was able to pull back some files, and those recovered documents proved that they were intentionally wiped after the court order. This wasn't a system glitch. This wasn't an accidental deletion. This was purposeful destruction of evidence. And here's another detail that just makes this whole thing even sketchier. Witnesses, actual people who worked in those offices, reported that supervisors warned them to clear out certain files to avoid judicial discovery. Avoid judicial discovery. That's literally the definition of obstruction. You're actively trying to prevent the court from seeing evidence that it has a legal right to see. So when Bondi's defense tried to claim that, oh, these files never existed, or oh, we lost them accidentally, the prosecution just kept piling on evidence that completely demolished those claims. Digital recovery? Check. Security logs? Check. Eyewitness testimony? Check. Physical evidence of boxes being removed from DOJ offices? Check. This wasn't he said, she said. This was a mountain of documented proof. And the judge saw right through it. In the courtroom, the judge basically said, and I'm paraphrasing, but this is the gist. This is not circumstantial evidence. We have multiple witnesses. We have server logs. We have digital forensics. All of it points to Attorney General Bondi knowingly destroying evidence in violation of this court's direct order. That word knowingly is crucial because it means intent. It means this wasn't a mistake or an oversight. Bondi knew what she was doing, knew it was wrong, and did it anyway. Now let's talk about what this means for accountability. Because here's the thing, people in power get away with stuff like this all the time. How many times have we seen politicians or high-ranking officials skate by on technicalities, or because they had expensive lawyers who could muddy the waters? But this time the evidence was too strong and the judge wasn't having it. This conviction sends a message that even if you're the attorney general, even if you're supposed to be the top cop in the country, you're not above the law. And this case is already becoming a rallying cry. People who've been calling for DOJ reform, for independent oversight of prosecutorial power, for real institutional checks on government secrecy, they're pointing to this conviction as proof that the system can work when there's enough pressure and enough evidence. But it also highlights how rare this is. How often do we actually see someone at this level held accountable? Not often enough. The ripple effects from this are going to be huge. Congress is already talking about deeper investigations. There are calls for structural reforms to prevent this kind of thing from happening again. And politically, this is going to be a hot topic for months, maybe years, because if Bondi was willing to destroy evidence, what else was being hidden? What other files were conveniently lost or deleted? Who else knew about this and either participated or looked the other way? And let's not forget, Bondi wasn't some random appointee. She was Attorney General under President Trump's second term. She was supposed to be cleaning house, draining the swamp, all those campaign promises. But instead we get a conviction for obstruction of justice and evidence tampering. The irony is almost too much. You can't make this stuff up. The defense tried everything. They brought in their own tech experts to try to explain away the server logs. They tried to discredit the whistleblowers. They even suggested that maybe foreign hackers deleted the files to frame Bondi. Yeah, that was actually an argument they made, and the judge wasn't buying any of it, because when you have multiple independent sources of evidence, all pointing to the same conclusion, it doesn't matter how creative your explanations are. The facts are the facts. And here's something that really stood out during the trial. Several DOJ employees testified that they felt uncomfortable with what they were being asked to do. They knew it was wrong. They knew it was illegal, but they felt pressured to comply because these orders were coming from the Attorney General herself. That's a toxic work environment right there. That's what happens when leadership prioritizes loyalty over legality. So yeah, this is a big deal. This is historic, and anyone who tries to downplay it or pretend like, oh, it's just politics, or oh, it's a witch hunt, they're ignoring a mountain of evidence that a federal judge found convincing enough to issue a guilty verdict. The facts are the facts. The logs don't lie. The witnesses testified under oath, and Bondi got caught. Okay, so let's break this down into the core points, because there's a lot to unpack here, and I want to make sure we're all on the same page about why this matters so much. Point 1, the evidence was overwhelming. Like, I can't stress this enough. This wasn't a close case where the jury had to deliberate for days trying to figure out if maybe possibly Bondi might have known something. No, the evidence was crystal clear. We had digital forensics showing files were deleted after the court order. We had server logs with timestamps proving when and how those deletions happened. We had whistleblowers and DOJ staff testifying under oath about the instructions they received. We had physical witnesses who saw boxes of documents being removed from offices. And we had Bondi's own changing story, first denying the files existed, then claiming they were lost accidentally, which just made her look even more guilty. When you stack all of that up, there's no wiggle room. The judge saw the evidence and said guilty. Done. Point 2, this sets a massive precedent for accountability. And I know we throw around the word precedent a lot in politics, but this one actually matters. Because how often do we see someone at the Attorney General level, someone who's supposed to be the ultimate guardian of justice in this country, actually face consequences for breaking the law? Almost never. People at that level usually have enough resources, enough connections, enough legal firepower to avoid real punishment. They resign quietly, or they get a slap on the wrist, or charges get dropped due to some technicality. But Bondi got convicted. A federal judge looked at the evidence and said, you broke the law and you're guilty. That's huge. And what does this mean going forward? It means, or at least it should mean, that no one is untouchable. It means that even if you're at the highest levels of government, even if you think you can control the narrative, or hide behind executive privilege, or whatever, there are still mechanisms in place to hold you accountable if the evidence is strong enough, and if people are willing to push for justice. Now, will this actually lead to lasting change? That remains to be seen. But at minimum, this conviction is a data point that reformers can point to when they argue that accountability is possible. Point 3, the political fallout is going to be insane. Because think about the context here. Bondi was Attorney General under President Trump. She was supposed to be this fierce defender of law and order, someone who would go after corruption and clean up the system. And instead, she gets convicted of obstruction of justice and evidence tampering. Like, come on, the optics are terrible, and you better believe that political opponents are going to hammer this point home. They're going to say, look, this is what happens when you appoint loyalists instead of qualified professionals. This is what happens when you prioritize politics over justice. But it's not just about political point scoring. There are real questions that need to be asked. Like, what was in those files that Bondi was so desperate to hide? What information was so damaging that she was willing to risk her career, her reputation, her freedom to keep it from seeing the light of day? And who else knew about this? Was this a solo operation? Or were other people in the DOJ involved? Were people in the White House aware? Did anyone try to stop it? Or did they just let it happen? These are the questions that investigators are going to be asking now. And Congress, oh man, Congress is going to have a field day with this. Expect hearings, expect subpoenas, expect a whole new round of investigations into what was really going on at the DOJ during Bondi's tenure. Because if she was willing to destroy evidence in one case, what's to say there weren't other cases where files mysteriously disappeared or records got lost? And point 4. This is a wake-up call for everyone who cares about government transparency and the rule of law. Because here's the uncomfortable truth. What Bondi did trying to hide evidence from a federal court, that kind of thing probably happens more often than we'd like to think. The difference is, most of the time, people don't get caught. Or if they do get caught, they have enough power to make the problem go away. But in this case, the whistleblowers came forward. The forensics team did their job. The witnesses testified, and the judge didn't back down. That's what it takes to actually get accountability. But we shouldn't have to rely on lucky breaks and brave whistleblowers to catch this stuff. There should be systems in place, real oversight, real consequences, real transparency that prevent this from happening in the first place. And if this conviction leads to those kinds of reforms, then maybe something good can come out of this mess. So where do we go from here? Well, Bondi's legal team will probably appeal. That's standard procedure. But given the strength of the evidence, it's hard to see how an appeals court is going to overturn this verdict. The digital forensics alone are pretty much bulletproof. You can't argue with server logs and timestamps. You can't explain away recovered deleted files. And you definitely can't dismiss multiple eyewitnesses who all tell the same story. And beyond Bondi's personal legal troubles, there's the broader question of what this means for the Justice Department. Because the DOJ's credibility has taken a massive hit, how can the public trust an agency that just had its leader convicted of obstructing justice? How can prosecutors credibly go after other people for evidence tampering when their own boss just got nailed for the exact same thing? These are serious institutional problems that aren't going to be solved overnight. President Trump is going to have to address this too. He appointed Bondi, he vouched for her, and now she's a convicted felon. That's not great. Expect some tough questions about vetting processes, about why warning signs were ignored, about who knew what and when. And expect Trump to probably distance himself from this as much as possible, because let's be real, this is a political disaster. There's also the question of sentencing. What kind of punishment is Bondi looking at? For obstruction of justice and evidence tampering, we're talking potentially serious prison time. The sentencing guidelines for these kinds of crimes aren't a joke, and given the high-profile nature of this case, given that it involves an attorney general abusing her position of power, the judge might decide to make an example out of her, send a message that this kind of behavior won't be tolerated, and think about the broader implications for government oversight. How many other agencies have similar problems? How many other officials are sitting on evidence that should be public or should be turned over to courts, but they're just not? This conviction shines a light on a systemic problem. It's not just about one bad actor. It's about a culture of secrecy and a belief that powerful people can operate outside the rules. But you know what? Maybe, just maybe, this is exactly the kind of thing we need to see more of. Not corruption and obstruction, obviously, but accountability, consequences, the system actually working the way it's supposed to work. Because for too long, people at the highest levels of government have operated like they're above the law. And every once in a while, it's important to remind everyone, including the people in power, that they're not. The whistleblowers who came forward deserve credit too. They put their careers on the line, maybe even their safety, to expose what was happening. And without them, this whole thing might have stayed buried. That takes courage, that takes integrity, and it shows that there are still people in government who care more about doing the right thing than protecting powerful people who break the law. So yeah, Pam Bondi got convicted. The evidence was overwhelming. The judge didn't buy her excuses. And now we wait to see what comes next. Because something tells me this story is far from over. The investigations are just getting started. The political fallout is going to continue for months. And the calls for reform are only going to get louder. This conviction might be the end of Bondi's career. but it could be the beginning of real change in how we hold government officials accountable. At least that's what we should be demanding.